Hi, good evening, everyone. We will bring the HR meeting to, open the HR meeting. Are there any comments on the agenda? Nope. All right, I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Thank you, Mrs. Plant. This evening, there are several policies on the agenda. The first is policy 314. This is a new policy that PSBA has recommended, and it is in regards to physical exams. Physical exams are required for all public school employees to complete, along with proof of a tuberculosis test within 30 days from the onset of employment. This policy is being presented as a new policy and one that the board will review at the February 15th board meeting as a first reading, and then subsequently a second reading and adoption at the March 24th or March 2024 board meeting. Questions about that policy? Thank you. Item B is a policy 314.1, HIV infection. This is a policy that's been retitled and numbered. The language is standard PSBA format. It's replacing two policies that have formerly existed. Policy 415, bloodborne pathogens for our professional employees, and 515, bloodborne pathogens for classified employees. This policy is categorized as a legal liability, and staff development does exist periodically in this regard. This policy represents safeguards and health safety issues for our staff. The two other policies that are listed in items C and D are the two that would be deleted. So in policy 314.1, HIV infection, which will be presented to the board for a first reading on February 15th at its public board meeting, and subsequently second reading and adoption at the March 2024 board meeting, would then allow us to delete board policy 415 for professional staff and policy 515 for classified staff. Are there any questions regarding that policy? No? Okay. That concludes my agenda.
Any public comment? Any questions from the board? All right, HR meeting is adjourned.
Will Mark be that brief?
Not nearly.
Not quite.
I'd like to call this meeting of the Finance Committee to order. And are there any public comments on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, I turn it over to Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. We do have somewhat of a packed agenda tonight. The first four items on the agenda are going to revolve around new business, while the remaining three will be more informational in nature. The first item on the agenda is going to will be in reference to our 2018 general obligation bonds and the opportunity to refinance those. At this time, I'm going to invite Scott Shearer from PFM up to the podium just to backstop my conversation a little bit here and add some more of the technical language. But if you look at the handout printed in front of you, as well as attached to board docs, you'll see a refinancing presentation regarding, like I said, the 2018 bonds. Currently, the 2018 bonds represent an outstanding balance of about $9.5 million at an average interest rate of 4.5%. What the administration is recommending from working with our financing team over at PFM is essentially a refinance of these bonds. We are not looking to extend the length of the bonds. We're not looking to take out more than what's required to pay off the bonds. This is simply a refinance, just like it would be in connection with, akin to a personal property, your home mortgage, just along those that nature. If you go to page 5 of your packet, you'll see essentially the summary. We would be looking for authorization, like I said, to refinance the principal amount in the amount of $9.8 million. The expected minimum savings rate would be about 3.3%, an estimated savings of about $320,000. That's assuming if we were to go out tomorrow and the market, were to react as our financing team predicts. And with that being said, I'm going to turn to Scott just to give some technical language and just another, brief summary of what we're asking the board or the finance committee to approve.
Yep. No, thank you. Great summary. I think you hit on all the key points. Again, just to stress on a couple things, we are not looking to change the structure of the 2018 bonds at all. We're keeping the same structure, just going from a higher rate to a lower rate, and that's what's going to be achieving the economic savings that has been mentioned. So it's a traditional refunding. The other thing that if you do want to move this forward to your next meeting, Bond Counsel has prepared a draft resolution that could be entertained that evening. In that resolution, just like I'd say the last probably 10 years or so resolutions at the school district, there are certain parameters in there. And so, Mark's talking about a little under a $10 million refunding transaction. That's ultimately what it's going to be. However, just like all the other parameters that we've done for the district, the amount that's in the resolution is usually about 20% higher. So you're going to see a number of about 12 million. I think that's reflected in your handout. I think it was said very well that the only purpose of this issue is only to refinance those 2018 bonds. We can't do anything else except for pay the cost of issuance, but we're not adding any new money for any capital project, strictly that refunding. So if we're able to, beat that minimum savings floor, I think the resolution is currently drafted as a 3% savings floor in it, which means if the market is better, obviously we're going to get you more savings. But after the transaction is completed, then there will be additional paperwork filed with the state that basically says, we filed for 12 million, we only needed 9.9 million, so eliminate that 2 million and change balance, which again, we've done that for all your parameters resolutions in the past. But otherwise, if you do decide to move forward, I believe we have it on the books for next week, a credit rating phone call.
Yep.
That's obviously a very important step. The district has an incredible credit rating. Very hard to maintain that in today's day and age, but we're going to have a call, prepare for it. We don't expect any changes. Finances and everything are still very good here at the school district, but that's a key step that we need to do. And then hopefully we would be ready to move forward with pricing sometime later this month, probably the very end of this month is what we would have targeted, assuming the market holds out. Now, the market is very volatile. Today we saw about a 10 basis point jump in interest rates. Tomorrow we could see the same kind of volatility going downward. So it's basically every day we see some ups and downs. But again, overall right now, if we were to do the transaction tomorrow, we would exceed that floor that's in the draft resolution. So we would prepare everything. If you move forward to the February 15th meeting, that resolution is approved on February 15th. We target that last week of February to price. If we see that the market's not there at the end of February, we'll just put it on hold. Because legally we will not be able to move forward if we're below that savings floor. And then if it's 2 weeks later or 2 months later and we're back at it, we'll obviously update the business office and then update you all about what transpired. But otherwise, we expect to be able to complete this transaction here at the price and lock in the savings at the end of the month. And that would be about a month after that is when the transaction would close.
Any questions for Scott in regards to the recommended action? Additionally, I just want to point out one thing. If you look at the attachment as well as what's up on the screen, you'll see an estimated savings. As Scott had mentioned, this is the minimum $319,000. This is something that we're always going to be on the lookout for in regard to all of our bonds, but this is something that we've been working with them in connection with the development of next year's budget. So if this is something that we can get out of the committee, get our financing team to move forward with, and then ultimate board action, this will then have a favorable result on our 24-25 budget preparation. So looking, like I said, over $300,000. Now, granted, that's over the span of the life of the bond. However, we would see significant savings in the first couple of years. So this would have an effect in a positive nature going forward to 24-25 budget development. Scott, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Oh, wait, sorry. You have a...
Yeah, may I ask one other question? So the savings, how does that reflect? Is it, if I'm looking at page 4 here with the bond payment for the current structure, is it we finish out a year early on that, or is it we save the 3% per year and the numbers go down just slightly, or How is that reflected on the budgets?
Basically, most of the savings would be realized in the 24-25 fiscal year, and then probably a little bit more in the 25-26 fiscal year. And then every year thereafter, the debt service would basically be about the same as it is currently today. So usually school districts, I'd say 98% of the time, take the savings, as much of the savings as they can up front, as opposed to over time. That's kind of the traditional way to realize savings. So right now, it's spread over the next 2 fiscal years.
And it's $300,000 over the life of the bond, and it's 3% over the life of the bond.
I assume that's inclusive of like getting closing cost fees and all that.
Exactly. That's net of any and all of the costs, correct.
And you still probably propose advocating for this as opposed to if interest rates go down next year, we'll deal with it then.
Yeah, well, there will be a call feature on these bonds so that we can refinance in the future. And then the district does have other debt outstanding that will become callable in 2025. So at that point, if interest rates do move more favorably, we'll have a chance to refinance those at that time too. Any other thoughts or questions?
Thank you very much, Scott. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So then we'll see you next Thursday.
Yeah, that'll be next Thursday.
Yep, very good. Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the Montgomery County Intermediate Service Unit Services budget. What we're looking for with this agenda item is to review and approve the MCIU proposed mandated services budget for board approval. The Montgomery County school districts are required to consider and vote on the mandated services budget. If you look at the attachment in board docs, this revolves around governmental relations support, professional learning, professional development, and then some technology services through the IU for member districts. The budget is projected to increase $70,205 to a total budget of $2,102,655, or 3.5% overall. The Colonial School District contribution would be set at $94,662, a $939 increase, or just about 1%. So we are looking for recommendation and approval to move this to the February board meeting, if anybody has any questions. Okay. Next item on the agenda is our spring musicals. Some of the committee members on the in the meeting tonight will be familiar. Every year when either our high school or our middle school puts on their productions, we have the budget for each production presented to the board or to the committee for approval. The first is the PW High School Colonial Players musical. This year they'll be putting on The Little Mermaid. The budget is attached for approval. And what this does is, one, this gives us the opportunity to showcase as well as advertise the musical to anybody listening on YouTube or in the audience, as well as make sure we have committee and board approval to pay some of the contractors as well as the employees listed on there. The budget is split into 2 ledgers, if you would like to think about it that way. There is the Colonial School District investment in the extracurricular activities or extracurricular contracts, as listed, various different positions between director, production manager, assistant director, musical, technical, choreographer, all the way down to costumes and makeup. That's the investment that the school district makes from the extracurricular contract side, as well as the spring musical activity fund, in which they fundraise, sell tickets, sell pamphlets, as well as sell concessions that night, thus generating their own revenue and then paying the expenses listed out as well. You can see it ranges from additional character coaches, costume, as well as musicians, all the way down to rents and royalties, lighting, equipment, and costumes. So that is the PW High School musical, The Little Mermaid, to be held March 8th to the 10th. And then we have the Colonial Middle School Spring Musical, Camp Rock. This, again, same format. This is what we require of the directors each year. And you'll see same pro forma format where the Colonial School District has an investment in the extracurricular contracts for the director as well as the technical director. And then the CMS activity fund as well also generates their own ticket sales, fees, fundraising activities, and then pays their related expenses as per the budget. So again, we are looking for approval from the committee to move both of these budgets out of the committee to the board approval meeting, thus advertise in both musicals, as well as allowing us to pay the contractors once the musicals are over. Any questions regarding either of those budgets?
Yes, Mark, quick question. Remind me, the both have a deficit. Obviously, the PW one is much higher than than the CMS, but those deficits would be potentially taken care of by whatever fundraising is done?
So if you were to look at the PW high school budget, and I believe you're looking at the $34,000 deficit, it's overall, yes, there's no money coming into the district directly to pay that $34,000 out. And in terms of that's just, instead of thinking of it as a deficit, it's what the district is contributing or investing in the musical. Overall, the activity fund side of the ledger is at a little bit of a surplus of about $1,900, in which that's what they're required to look at. They're required to make sure what they're spending is what they're bringing in. What the district is investing is outside of their books and is not a cost that they would need to incur.
District investment is similar to coaching salaries for, football, basketball, other extracurricular activities, our various clubs. But obviously, the productions are massive for a high school and middle school, and they involve the student activity fund, which is separate from the district budget, the district general fund. So since there is quite a bit of money being collected, and then if they want to hire additional supports, choreographers, lighting, those types of things beyond what the district already invests, they're paying for that through money that is generated through ticket sales. And that, because of the fact that those accounts are in and out type of accounts, we make sure the board's aware, because in any high school in the Commonwealth of our size, with all the different clubs and all the different activities, fundraising, car washes, lollipop sales, service learning opportunities, there's probably several $100,000 that go in and out of those accounts, and the district is responsible for making sure that it is collected correctly, accounted for, and then redistributed appropriately. And there have been, unfortunately, too many cases in the past where money's been misappropriated. It has to go back to the students, and we encourage every year for the 80 or 90 different clubs and activities that we have to spend the money that they generate on the current students that are in the program. It's okay to leave a little seed money from one year to the next, particularly to buy like sheet music or things like that, or to get fundraisers started, but the goal is not to accumulate. The goal is to spend it back on the students who are currently doing the fundraising.
Just to clarify that I'm reading this right. The district's contributing the $34,000. The right side of the ledger is positive approximately $2,000. So the net is the district is outlays $32,000. It's not 32 plus 34 for a negative of 66, correct?
No, correct.
Okay.
It's in total net 32,000.
All right, cool. Thank
Generally consistent with like what these typically run every year, or
Yeah, when we look at the historical measurement of the extracurricular contracts, this is usually how it's weighed. Yes, yeah. Like Dr. Christian said, we always want to make sure that these activity funds are essentially breaking even. We don't want to see a huge influx and then see them sit on it and not spend it. So we do monitor their budget. We do monitor the dollars that come in and out, as well as reconcile each one of their activity funds and monitor them on a monthly basis.
And then last year there was 2 CMS productions. This year there's just 1 again.
I have to check with Amy. She did the 7th and 8th grade production. I think she's trying to do 2 again. She just doesn't have the budget done. The 6th grade production was like
They'll get
2
through the
months
7th
later.
and 8th, then they'll give us the 6th one.
Right. This is just the 7th and 8th one right now.
Great.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next on the agenda is the Central Montgomery VOTEC budget. This is just a informational item. There will be additional follow-up over the next month or two. We did get a first look at the VOTEC budget. The operating budget is scheduled to be approved in March, but I at least wanted to get this on our agenda tonight as a form of a discussion point, because the VOTEC budget does have a direct effect on Colonial's budget. As a member school district, as well as Upper Marion and Norristown, we are obligated to make our contribution in terms of tuition as well as debt service share for the VOTEC program. Currently, the preliminary budget for the VOTEC program is set at $11,096,442, which is actually a decrease of $400,599, 3.48% decrease year over year. However, the proposed contribution from Colonial School District is $2,461,844. This is an increase of $413,000, or almost 19.71% over the prior year. We worked with VOTEC last week and the administration of VOTEC to discuss their budget and their proposed contribution requirement from the member districts, and it was discovered through their audit for the 24-25 year that dating back to the 22-23 year, there was a miscalculation in tuition. They incorrectly applied an almost $800,000 credit twice to both us and Upper Marion, cumulative. So what Colonial School District is making up for is a $339,000 error that dates back to more than 2 years ago. Upper Marion is making up for almost a $500,000 error that they have to make up for. Norristown, if you think about the way the pendulum swings, is actually in the positive $800,000 that they would be receiving from the VOTEC program. We're going to continue to work with the VOTEC program and their administration over the next month or two to see, one, is this really a cash flow issue, or is this a correction of an error? If it's a correction of an error, is this something that we can weigh or that we can spread out over a few years? If it's a cash flow issue, then obviously that's something that we need to take into consideration with our budget. But I at least wanted to make sure the board was aware that this $339,000 adjustment is impacting our budget, and you'll see this in our budget presentation for 24-25 tonight. This is just new information that we've got over the last week or two. I'll work with the members of our board who are on the on the joint committee with the VOTEC to go through their budgets, go over the error. We did meet with their auditor to go over it, and again, it's going to become a matter of, is this a cash flow problem or is this just a calculation problem? I will have an update in regard to that over the next few weeks, and then that will wrap up then into our March presentation.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Didn't we get, I don't want to use the term caught off guard, but I will, caught off guard a little bit last year by the amount that we were asked?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so now this is 2 years in a row that we're seeing some lack of clarity, I guess we should say?
This is the second year in a row that we are hit with an increase that was not expected. Correct.
And all right, I'll pause there.
So, business manager and former executive director both retired in the past few years. So we have new executive director, newer and newer business manager with the auditor that are uncovering this. We had the students attend the program, so it's just it's a timing issue, not it's a timing issue. You wish they should have reconciled it correctly in 22-23. For the board's edification, we are billed by Central Monaco Tech School based upon a 3-year average enrollment. And the purpose of the 3-year average enrollment is to avoid this particular situation. So if you suddenly have, which is a very good thing, you go from 100 students to 170 students participating, the district can budget for it over several years. So it's 100, 170, and then whatever you had in year one. It's not just, you had 70 more kids, and the tuition is about $14,000, and you're looking at several $100,000 in an increase in 1 year for a relatively smaller line item. So that's why there's a 3-year average. At the end of each year, because there might be adjustments based upon student choice, students decide not to attend or to attend, there's supposed to be a reconciliation. And so that is part of the challenge here. So we have seen an increase over the past several years in students participating in several of the technical programs, and that's because they've been adding some really high quality programs, and so that's a good thing. We have several students in automotive and building trades where there's certainly a need for skilled labor in our community workforce. So Mark and the business managers from Upper Marion and Norristown are going to have regular meetings moving forward so that this type of adjustment isn't so drastic.
Thank you. I mean, I appreciate that. And I just think in terms of checks and balances, like it is our responsibility to make sure that we're consistently meeting and making sure that what's projected or expected and, enrollment and all of that is lining up. So I guess I'm just a little surprised that 2 years in a row we're getting caught off guard by this.
Sure.
So as Dr. Ruth said, we'll meet over the next month with their administration to see what we can do to either streamline this or what options there are. But this will have an effect on our budget 24-25, and you'll see that in the subsequent budget presentation. And there will also be an agenda item for next month's committee meeting when we have any update that we can get. Okay. Next item on the agenda is the 24-25 update for the upcoming budget. You also see printed out package as well as within the board docs. So with the 24-25 budget timeline moving forward, you'll see on this slide, our timeline going now is obviously tonight is budget presentation number 2, followed up by subsequent budget presentations in March and April, as well as proposed adoption of the budget in April and then subsequent final adoption in June. What we'd like to do between now and March, if not specifically at least before March spring break, is that we'd like to invite anybody on this committee as well as anybody on the board to a budget workshop that can be held at administration offices. That'll give anybody on the board or the committee a chance to get more in depth and more involved and really look at some of the finer numbers as well as the budget presentation goes for 24-25. We'll work with Linda Turner to see what works for everybody's schedule, just to bring everybody in. And we can do this in multiple stages, multiple groups. But I think that there'll be something to be good for some of the newer committee members as well as just the committee as a whole to really sit down and get into the numbers as far as the budget presentation for 24-25 goes. This is just a reminder slide, and some of these slides will look a little similar to prior month. This is just want to make sure we're always refreshing and making sure we're building that foundation. You'll see that for 24-25 as it stands right now with the general fund. Our unassigned balance is $12,088,440. If the board and the committee recalls, we did subsequently move out $5.75 million last month in terms of the CES renovation fund, as well as move around some funds between the assigned balance and the capital projects. So just again, to give a little bit of basis, our total fund balance right now sits at $26,500,673. Moving on to the next slide. Again, this is our historical data for the millage rates of Colonial School District as well as other Montgomery districts, Montgomery County school districts. Currently, Colonial still sits at number 3 from the lowest at 25.02 mils. And what I'd like to show on this slide is what's changed from the last month. What have we as administration been able to evaluate? What changes have we looked at from a revenue standpoint as well as an expenditure standpoint? From a revenue standpoint, you can see that we look like we picked up $840,123. That was made up of 4 line items. One is the interest income. Interest income is coming in very strong for the 23-24 year. And from working with our partners at our depositories, we feel that rates are going to remain steady. I don't know if anybody listens to Jerome Powell's, any of his most recent press conferences or reads any the financial magazines, but lately it seems like rates are minimally going to stay strong, if not steady where they are right now. We're not expecting many rate cuts this calendar year, if not at all. So we would move to budget an increase in our interest income of about $500,000. Additionally, our Access program, which is a special education support program, now has the eligibility to cover some of our costs in regards to one-to-one aides, behavioral specialists. So we've essentially moved those costs from an unfunded general fund dollar to a Access program reimbursement. So we're able to harness some of those dollars to get back from the federal government for our special education. So we're picking up $321,000 there. We had some adjustments to our retirement subsidies and Social Security reimbursement from the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Ultimately, we're looking at an increase in revenue projections of about $840,123. On the other side of the ledger, changes in expense projections. As our PFM partners were here earlier tonight, we are looking at the refinance for the 2018 general obligation bonds. Estimated savings, we have measured about $100,000. We're going to obviously see where the market comes in at and when we can actually, when we do refi, what that number would look like for the 24-25 number. But that that $100,000 line item right now is just kind of a placeholder. I wanted to be a little conservative. I didn't want to shoot too high for the moon on that, but if we can harness more savings, we will, and that'll be presented in the March Finance Committee meeting. We did receive a second look from our healthcare insurance brokers at Bucksmont Insurance, and the net effect between health and prescription was a decrease, while albeit small, still a decrease going in the right way of about $82,891. Those are the two decreases as far as expense projections go. The next three line items, the one material that we just talked about is the increase in the VOTEC tuition, about $339,000. With that number hitting us now and the most updated information from them, we always want to make sure we're pulling that into our calculations, as well as some advancements for our personnel, as well as technology equipment upgrades throughout the district. So we are looking at an increase in expense of about $331,000. Ultimately, the net effect of those two line items results in a $508,829 swing in a positive direction. So we're decreasing our deficit by about $508,000. What we're also going to be discussing tonight and also recommending going forward is the use of fund balance. If the committee recalls, we have a pot of money called an assigned fund balance that we use to offset tax increases or expenditures going forward. It currently sits at $4 million. That $4 million is cumulative of multiple years worth of surpluses, as well as the $3 million we just moved out of our COVID money into the assigned balance. That $400,000 represents 10% of the assigned balance. And as an administration standpoint, we feel that 10% measurement of using that assigned balance is appropriate right now for this presentation. So ultimately, our deficit at January 2nd, about a month ago, was $3,694,463. With the effects of the changes in revenues and expenses, as well as use of fund balance, we are now looking at a deficit of only $2,785,634. This ultimately is the summary of the changes over the last month that we've been working with buildings and departments, as well as some of our other professional services to really drill down the budget to something that we can continue to work on. Any questions on just this one page before I get into more of the detail?
Yeah. Sorry.
Mark, I actually, because I didn't want to cut you off, on the first slide with the dates, I have two questions. That first slide, too, I think it is. Based off of the conversation that you mentioned having with VOTEC, is that timeline incorporated in here? So that you guys can reconcile?
Yes.
Okay, that's incorporated.
The timeline allows us to have many discussions and enough time to really hammer out the VOTEC budget and issues we have with that. Yes.
Okay. And then my second question was on the slide that you were on in terms of the vote. Well, it's technically not, but the VOTEC tuition. And maybe you said this and I missed it. Average, normal, like what is our normal contribution?
It hovers around $2 million. We're right now obviously with this adjustment, we're at 2.4. In the few years that I've been here, obviously as enrollment does increase and we have seen our ADMs increase, it's hovered around 1.8 to 2 million historically, as far as I know. And just with this adjustment, though, is having a large effect on that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just a quick question on the interest. How much is what's the average balance that's on?
We collect them. If you think about it, school district finances and the way it works, a majority of the revenues come in for our local purposes in the first 3 months. So we collect about $100 million in the first 3 months. Right now, I know at one of our depositories, one of our main depositories, Pliget, we're about 5.25. With our operating, we're around 4.8, 4.9. I can get you a cash flow.
That's right.
Project on that, but
this assumes like a 5% return, give or take. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And I also look at historical data, and I look, what we've got over the last few years. Obviously, I don't want to shoot for the moon and expect to have rates stay where they are. So there is a little bit of a conservativeness in that. But just looking at where we are currently now and what we're projecting, I think that the $500,000 adjustment is a steady and strong number to adjust to.
Sorry, can I just ask a question about the going back a little bit to the tech school? When you guys have those conversations with them, is it appropriate for any of CSD's JOC members to be part of those conversations, just to listen in?
That would be something that I would work with the Joint Operating Committee after we have our kind of in-depth conversations with them. Yeah, obviously we want to make sure that you have enough knowledge to go to your meetings and have those discussions, and not just in terms of this calculation and their budget, but just their negotiations going forward. I know they have some labor negotiations going forward, and obviously it has an effect on member districts. But that would be
I think the
something
JOC should call a finance committee meeting.
I'm sorry?
I think the JOC of Upper Marion, Norristown, and Colonial should
Right.
call a finance committee meeting, separate from the work Mark and the other business managers will
Right.
do.
No, I agree.
I think the finance committee over the JOC needs to reconvene.
Thank you.
Okay. So as of today, from a summary standpoint, like I said, we're looking at a deficit of about $2.7 million. What we're going to look at, factors considered going forward, we will continue to evaluate the assessments changes throughout the district as they come in from the townships and the borough. We'll continue to monitor the funding from the Commonwealth. Governor Shapiro has his budget address tomorrow at 11 o'clock, so everybody's anxiously waiting to see what he says as far as funding levels for not just basic education, but special education as well as other programs. We'll continue to monitor our federal programs, Title, ESSERS, ARP, and then try to harness any other grants that we could look forward to going forward that come out of the state as well as private grants. These next few slides just give a little bit of a overall as well as a topside review as to where our revenues come over now that we've effectuated these changes. You can see from a revenue standpoint, we are looking at a $3.8 million increase year over year, almost 2.54% budget. And that is being driven by both the local, state, as well as federal revenues. When we look at our budget revenue by source, you can see that some of the larger change items in a positive direction result around the earned income taxes. I believe we spoke out about this at our last committee meeting where we talked about how we worked with our partners over at Berkheimer who do our payroll taxes for earned income tax collections and really try to hammer out the projections on that. And we still feel that that's a strong number at $12 million. The interest earnings, you can see a very material adjustment, $240,000 last budget, so it was bumped up to about $1.5 million this year. Again, we're looking at historical data, we're looking at our cash flows, we're looking at our rates that we're getting from our partners at our depositories. So local revenues are coming in at $125,939,840, a 1.82% year over year. State revenues, not much movement there just because we're still waiting on Governor Shapiro's budget. That'll be tomorrow with his address as well as subsequent evaluation and analysis. The district as well as all districts in the state are we're anxiously waiting to see how much money gets put into the general coffers of the school, or not general coffers, but into the school district funding as well as the basic education funding models for special education. So again, state revenues are $1.2 million year over year, a 4.95% increase. Federal revenues, we are moving, as we've discussed previously, moving into the last year of COVID money, and we're looking to spend down that. The biggest change on this federal revenues slide is the increasing the access funds. You can see access funds has historically hovered around 220,000 last year, 240 the year before, and 147 the year before. It's cost dependent. When we spend the dollars, we get the dollars back as far as the access program. The access program going forward is now allowing more eligible costs, more allowable costs, especially as relates to special education. So we felt that being able to harness that reimbursement was a step in the right direction for measuring our federal funding with access. On the other side of the ledger, we continue to look at our expenses in regards to how does that have an effect from our enrollment changes, our contractual obligations to salaries and future employee retention. As enrollment changes and we start to open up registration for the following year, how does that have an effect on any potential new hires? We've talked about the PSERS rate being decreased from 34% to 33.9%. The healthcare looks, as I mentioned, is only an 8.38% increase, coming down from the 9.1% increase. We will get a third look. That will come sometime in March. Obviously, that will have a factor in our budget in regards to health insurance and prescription. The debt service The refinancing of the 2018 bonds is a savings in the current year, so we'll be looking to harness that after we go to market and go to settlement on those bonds, and the VOTEC program. So those are the seven items right now we're looking at being mindful of when it comes to expenses.
Mark, can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely, sorry.
No, you're good. The last time we were having this conversation, we talked a little bit around the Title III funds, if you scroll up just a little bit.
Yep.
And I think I had asked a little bit around like where or why. Well, I know there was some missing. It looks like it's all filled in.
Yeah, there was miscoding in the Title III revenues. Yeah, that's why.
So I'm just curious because I don't understand necessarily how it gets allocated, why the stark changes over time.
So it's as far as I know from working with the federal programs, it's cost dependent as well as it's cost dependent obviously. Well, what happened in 2019 to 21, I would attribute to, obviously that's when we were in the COVID period, and you can see we're trying to ramp back up. That's why we're at $19,258. I will have to get a little bit more information though, and I know you did bring it up, and I did not get back to you on that, but I'll have to get you a little bit more information on. I think I was more geared to finding why those dollars weren't populated correctly, as opposed to the purpose for why there was a decrease or a little bit of a lag going from the 30,000 to the 19 currently.
Yeah,
I know it is administered through the IU,
right?
Not so much our federal programs department, even though we do work hand in hand with the IU.
Right. Right. I'm just, if you would, I would be grateful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yep.
I'm just a little curious on the the budget revenue. You are projecting almost $1.5 million as an increase in EIT. What is that made up of? Like, why are you expecting that much of a jump?
So when I was doing the analysis for all of our different revenues, I looked at the historical data for the earned income taxes. And if you look at our earned income taxes year over year over the last 3 years, we're trending up very aggressively. COVID, I think, brought a lot of people out of the city into our district, as well as a lot of the new homes and the new apartment complexes coming up, a lot of people moving into this area. And it wasn't only just my analysis, but from working with, like I said, our partners over at Berkheimer who do the actual collections of the earned income taxes. They can see, they drill down to the data, to the addresses and the wages, and they can kind of see who moved in. And there's more of a import of people moving in and in this area than there is people leaving. So just from that projection of the influx of people moving in, as well as the higher earners, that's kind of where we feel it's where we're going to land.
Thanks.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay. And again, we just want to continue to reemphasize that our enrollment, you can see over year since 2014, we've picked up 882 kids. And this year alone, we're up 202 kids to an enrollment currently of 5,578 kids or students. I apologize. Obviously, that has an effect through our budget from a investment in our teachers and our personnel, security, cafeteria aides, just everything. As soon as even just getting the kids to the school has an effect on that. That's something that we are very mindful of. Going forward, the overall picture between from our wages, benefits, professional services, all the way down to our debt service, you can see that our 24-25 new projected expenditure budget is $158,174,696, a 4.65% increase year over year of roughly almost $7 million. This is a new slide. Next, I really wanted to show the committee from a wages and benefits standpoint alone. You can see that historically we're right around that 70, 71, 72% of our budget is just our investment in personnel. It doesn't leave much leeway in terms of what can we control as terms of supplies and books and textbooks. So I thought that was a really interesting slide to show where a lot of our investment is going in terms of type of expenditures. And you can see that for the 24-25, again, because of a lot of the driving factor being the enrollment and the increase in those numbers, 71% of our overall 24-25 budget is resulting in salaries and benefits of $111,798,452, a 5.3% increase. If you continue down, you can see all other type of expenditures from professional services to debt make up about $1.6 million, a 3.8% increase. Obviously not as much as the salary and benefits, but just to give the board and the committee an idea as to what we're looking at in terms of where are we investing our dollars. 71% of every dollar in our budget in terms of wages and benefits. And in summary, when we look at our overall projected 2024-2025 final budget, our beginning unassigned fund balance of $12,088,444, our new revenue line item of $154,989,062, expenditures of $174,696, and the new line item for this presentation, not previously shown in our January committee presentation, of $400,000, brings our deficit down to $2.7 million, resulting in an ending fund balance of $23,315,039. What does all this mean in terms of our millage? As you can see, our current millage is at 25.02. It will result in an increase in our tax rate of 2.63%, bringing our new millage to 25.678%. We are trending in the right direction, fortunately. You can see as of the January meeting, we're at a 3.49% increase. As it stands right now, with the use of fund balance and the changes effectuated through our budget, we are now at a 2.63% tax increase to balance the budget, resulting in an improvement of about 0.86% in a decrease in required millage change. This next slide is just a little bit more of a detailed line item, one-page summary. This is actually a better slide than that one, but to get to the net effect of where that millage puts us. When we look at our historical information in terms of base index of 5.3%, tonight's 2.63% increase is considerably lower than what the base index is per PDE. And you can see where this puts us from a historical standpoint in terms of where Colonial has landed with each one of their years of approved changes for the tax rate. What a 2.63% increase would do on our assessed values throughout the district. On a $100,000 assessment, it would increase at $65.78. On the median assessed value parcels in our district, it would be $101.19, and $200,000 up $131.60. So this is just something that we want to be mindful of in regards of every $100,000 worth of assessment and every tenth of a point where we're looking at changing our millage. What does this do if we were...
Sorry.
Yep. You go, Jeremy.
You're rolling. You want to keep rolling?
Nope.
Okay.
Absolutely not. Go ahead.
We can talk about this later because I don't think math-wise I can figure it out offhand. But on page 15.
Yep.
Again, I certainly don't expect it. Can we? What would we have to? Would the deficit have to be zero for the change at the bottom to be zero? Or am I thinking about that incorrect? Like what?
Yes.
Okay.
Not the change, but for the
millage to stay the same?
Yeah.
So if we...
for the 2.63 to be zero, the deficit would have to be zero.
Okay.
The change is just a change from the last budget presentation.
Oh, yeah, correct. I'm sorry.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
I just wanted to show
Sorry.
where we were last month in terms of what we'd be required to balance the budget to where we are now to balance the budget.
Right, all right. So okay.
Yeah.
But then if this 2.7 came, I'm making numbers up, came down to 2 million, the required would be 2.1 or something. Like
For about every $106,000 that we decrease the deficit by, we improve by a tenth of a point.
That's
so if we
10 basis points?
There's a slide coming up on that.
Oh, I got excited. Okay.
So,
All right. Thank you.
So if you look at this this slide right here, right now we're at 2.63. Let's say for ease of numbers, we were at 2.60. To get to 2.5, we would have to improve our deficit by about $106,000.
this is the Sue Moore slide.
For every $106,000 that we can find, essentially, like let's...
Absolutely.
For example, if we can improve revenues by $106,000, that 2.63 becomes 2.53. If it's $212,000 in increase in revenue, it then goes down 0.2 of a point. So then we go to 2.43.
So for clarification, given the historical increase on slide 17.
Yep.
The objective isn't to have an entirely deficit-free budget or balanced budget.
Well, that's,
Well, we always work to balance the budget, whether that's through use of fund balance and a combination of a tax increase. Obviously, if we do a 0% tax increase, we would eat away at a material amount of our fund balance, as well as then put ourselves in the hole cumulatively. Obviously, as the committee and the board is where costs go up every year. So if we were to do a 0, unfortunately, we'd really put ourselves behind the 8 ball. So instead of a 0, we could potentially subsequently be looking at something more detrimental the following year in terms of a tax increase. We always want to try to look to keep a level playing field, as well as use some of our fund balance, so it becomes a balance between the two. All right. Key factors within this 24-25 budget that I just wanted to make sure we address. Our bargaining unit contract with CEA is in place until 2028. It's great to have labor peace, and HR, Dr. Christian, as well as the leaders of the CEA worked hard to make sure we had that for the next multiple years. So that's great to have that in terms of measuring the budget in terms of personnel. The student enrollment is a large factor, as you saw, in our continued growth. Our investment in our professional certified staff due to that enrollment is currently a factor. Our contracted student transportation services, the RFP did come back, and we're looking to put forward a recommendation at the March FMT committee meeting. We're currently in negotiations with one of the contractors right now, but that's something that we feel very strongly that we can hammer out by March. And with that being said, we could essentially lock that up through 2031. We have no new debt instruments or borrowings going forward. While we do have the refinance, it is not new debt. We are not bringing on an additional burden with additional payments to any new type of debt instruments. And with the proposed increase currently, even if it stands right now with the 2.63%, that would still leave us third lowest in the county, as indicated on this slide. You can see on this slide, we effectuated the 2.63% through our budget and through our millage, resulting in a 25.678 millage, still would remain third lowest in the county, still only above Wissahickon and Upper Merion. That is assuming that these districts all enact a 0% increase in their tax rate, but we'll see where they all land. But as it stands right now, we'd still be third lowest. Jeremy.
So I have another question
You're good?
here.
Absolutely.
And this may have touched on a question that Chris had before, but page 8 is this is one with the pie chart with revenue sources. So what's the difference between earned income taxes and current real estate taxes?
Earned income taxes are taxed to wages, and then current real estate taxes obviously are just parcel driven.
So on the parcel driven one, is it? I guess it's
We're fighting decreased assessed values in addition. That's why that's a little bit lower. Yeah, we get those reports every month. This most recent month, I think there was only a $46,000 change in effectuated tax revenues in terms of that line item goes. We'll keep measuring that month over month, but with the way the commercial properties are going right now, we're battling a decreasing assessed values.
and that's offset by obviously more homes and all that.
Right, correct.
Stuff, which on the commercial properties, obviously, much
right. If
different
you see
scale.
a lot of the apartment buildings going up, or they talked about the proposed apartment buildings going up along the waterfront, those would have a much more advantageous effect on our assessed values as opposed to commercials, which are trending down right now. Yeah, there's a give and take, obviously, every month between residential, commercial, as well as agricultural. But our base of parcels is between residential and commercial, about 92%.
Hey, Mark.
I'm sorry, Will, go ahead.
No, you go.
Each spring, Mark, Joe Alley, and myself go visit each of the municipalities and sit down with their township manager and the code enforcement officer and any other planning folks that they have, and talk about current residential developments that are either in the works or planned, as well as commercial properties too. Just get an overview of what White Marsh, Conshohocken, and Plymouth Meeting are doing.
I was going to ask, with the, when you guys go back and forth with the commercial properties, are there any potential big property management groups that are planning on leaving because, you know, everything's been so down since COVID? Are they, I guess if it sells, there's a transfer tax there, but I'm just
Right.
wondering,
If there's a sale, there's a transfer tax, but we're not seeing so much commercial owners leaving their properties as much as they are just contesting the assessed values. I think they're more of a holding pattern, and they see the values of the commercial properties going down. So obviously then they're moving to decrease their tax burden. I don't think you're seeing a lot of sales in terms of that. You're just seeing a lot of reassessments. So just to reiterate, this is basically the summary schedule for tonight's presentation. Kind of puts everything together in terms of projected revenues, expenditures, the use of the fund balance, as well as where that increase would put us in terms of a proposed new millage, the tax effect of that 2.63% increase on assessed values, and where that would put us if we were to enact on this within this month, although we will continue to obviously work over the next few months. But just if all things considered where we stood tonight, we'd be at the 25.678. We talked about the key factors within the budget. The next steps that the administration will continue to review is that, as we spoke about, we will continue to review the assessed values of the parcels within the district over the next few months. Enrollment, we will continue to keep a very close eye on in terms of student to personnel ratios, as well as evaluating any need for new positions. And then with Governor Shapiro's Commonwealth budget update tomorrow, we'll look to see what type of other investment the state is looking to make within school districts. Obviously, that'll have an effect on our budget as well as on districts throughout Montgomery County.
Kindergarten enrollment opens this week.
Yep.
So that'll be very active, I'm sure. There is a certain amount of growth that is already within the district that the board is aware of. By way of example, we have about 357 seniors who will be graduating this coming June, and we have over 500 first graders. So there's growth already there. Within this proposed budget, there are 3 new professional positions. I can't tell you where yet, obviously, because we need to see where enrollment falls. So we'll be watching that very carefully. You know, the current kindergarten is about 472, 473. So the larger classes are here to stay for a little while. When you get into the middle grades, we plateau for a little bit until this current first grade gets up to the middle school. We're sitting around 395 to 410, 415 in the current classes. Current sixth grade's a little bit larger, but for the most part, we're level for a couple of years. But if we get another 470, 500 in kindergarten, then obviously there's a trend. Biggest challenge is predicting resales of homes. It's formulaic for, and we did the enrollment study recently. We can put that back in board notes for everybody. You can make estimates based upon the size of homes, estimates on apartment complexes. The resale is very challenging, and I have a friend who works for a local abstract company and does a lot of searches for title searches, and he says he's never been busier than the past 2 or 3 years in this area. It's a popular place to live.
Hey, Dr. Christian, I don't think I've ever asked this before. Like, what do we tend to lose between elementary school and high school as far as kids that go off to private schools, or I guess they would all be private schools, like for different
non-pubs. So the biggest drop is probably from 8th to 9th grade. In the district, we have 5,350 kids. We transport a little over 6,000 students, 6,100 students. So we're about 9-10% non-pub, maybe 11%. In recent years, we've had fewer students leave the district from 8th to 9th grade. My first couple years here, I think it was like 50 to 60 kids per year, and now it's I think under 30, maybe even in the under 20 one year, because of there's great schools all over this area, private and public, but the number of programs that we offer at the high school is really, as evidenced by their most recent evaluation and test scores from the state. I mean, it's there for the taking at the school. Yep.
I think more importantly, have we done an over-under on how many sets of twins will be in the next kindergarten enrollment for next year yet?
I actually received an email today that the twins families have been so gracious about doing different news stories. They finally told us we had enough, and we honored that back before the new year turned. And today I had a university contact me that's doing a research study on how twins learn to read and write and reading comprehension. And I called them and I'm like, it sounds like a very interesting study. There is no way I can present this to our twins in kindergarten. Like, we need a break from the coverage. So we'll see. 17 in the kindergarten class, 17 sets of twins. Twindergarten. Families were so nice. They did a bunch of stories and they're just like, okay, we've had enough. Understandably so. I was sort of amazed, and I have nephews that are twins, but I was really kind of amazed that this university got a federal grant to do this type of study. I'm like, interesting.
Okay, if no other questions on the 24-25 budget development, we'll move to the next agenda item.
Sorry. Mark, I just have one more question.
Yes.
Scrolling all the way back up to the top, the technology expense. I know the technology equipment upgrade to $47,000. I know previously when we did the Chromebook, when the financing fell through, that we ended up financing that out of the capital reserve, not capital reserve fund, but out of the reserved money. Is there a scenario that we would do that again to offset some of the upfront costs? Yeah, we leased it to ourselves.
The Chromebook internal lease was done through the capital reserve. Yeah, the technology equipment upgrade you see here is not related to the Chromebook. It is related to multiple labs throughout the district that the technology just was so ancient that we just felt the need that it was time to turn it over. Yeah, and that was done in connection with the curriculum as well as the technology department to, one, evaluate the needs from a curricular nature, and then two, look at the technology to see, one, is it something that we can work with what we currently have, or is it something that we need to go out and buy? And that was basically the adjustment cost for that.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to the next item. We're going to be looking at current year 23-24 budget document. Now that we did where we're going, we'll take a look at where we are right now. And the committee should be pretty familiar with these slides. The first slide is the general fund budget comparison from both local and expenditure standpoint. You can see that local revenues coming in very strong at 92.83% of budget at $114,822,057, very comparable with prior year. State revenues and federal revenues are also very comparable and in line with expectations. Overall revenues are currently stand at $125,843,878, representing 83.26% of budgeted numbers for the 23-24 year. Again, very comparable with prior years, 82.93% of actual revenues through January of 2023 compared to 2024. On the other side of the ledger, we have all of our different associated expenditures from wages all the way down to other use of funds. The first 15 payrolls of the year were processed with updates to contracts in accordance with the bargaining units. Benefits are in line with wages and expectations for the month. Again, just to reemphasize that while the benefits are in line with the budget, you can see that the benefits is valued at $18,187,887, representing 45% of the budget, while the prior year was just north of $16.7 million. This large difference was attributed to the fact that we had a fund balance over at the healthcare consortium in which we took advantage of using those funds as opposed to internal district dollars. The district is self-funded, which means that we pay money every month into the healthcare consortium. They process our claims, And then any remaining money there sits in our fund balance. It basically creates our own surplus over there. Last year, our fund balance was north of $4 million, and with the action required from the consortium, we were required to use approximately $1 million of fund balance at the consortium as opposed to our own money. So if you were to add the $1 million back into the benefit line item for prior year, that would put us right in line or just about there with current year expectation of benefits. Moving further down with professional services in our 300 object, we're seeing a large investment in our special education department in terms of support services. These are mandated and required services per educational plans for our students. The large driving item right now is our elementary one-to-one aides requirement. We are contracted with multiple different contractors throughout the district to provide services for our elementary kids. And as you can imagine, as our enrollment goes up, our needs for special education services are increasing, and we're seeing a large investment in our one-to-one aides in terms of special education. Our 400 property services is trending at 93.91% of budget, $1.6 million. This is due to our payments on our Chromebooks, repairs for student Chromebooks, as well as the plumbing repairs over at White Marsh Elementary that ran under the asphalt. That was a pretty large undertaking with Joe Lally, his team, and the contractors. The 500 other services line item is valued at $7.7 million, 43.55% of budget. Again, we spoke about this last month. The invoices from our contractor in the prior year, 22-23, basically were not received in a timely manner. This time last month, we were 1 month behind, and this time last year, we were 2 months behind. So there's about $1 million sitting in prior year expenditures that weren't processed due because of a late remittance in the invoice from the vendor. I do expect that line item to flatten out and become more comparable as we move forward and we get more in line with prior year's payment schedule. But that's just the material difference in that 500 line item. In the 600 object, we have $4,471,000, roughly 70.53% of budget compared to the prior year's 63.35% of budget. As we spoke about at the FMT committee, we had our investment in the new security cameras, zero-eye camera radios. I apologize. Cameras. Emerging technology, cameras, projectors, door handles, new textbooks for some of our content areas, and additional Chromebooks to backfill the needs of our students. In the 700 object, we have our overhead PA systems at Conshohocken and Ridge Park, CMS fitness equipment, maintenance vans, and an additional security truck and music equipment for our high school. Object 800 and 900 is moving forward in terms of expected dollars being spent related to the budget, as well as approved assessment appeals as agreed upon by the board, resulting in a total revenue over expenses of $53,665,493, 35.5% of budget. Again, if you take into account the $1 million worth of expenditures used over at the Bucksmont Consortium in prior year, we would fall more in line with prior year expenditures in terms of benefits. Again, we're trending consistently. I know with the $1 million in the vendor invoices from our transportation services in the prior year really skews the numbers right now, but I expect that to flatten out over the next few months. In terms of our revenue analysis, just to give the committee a little bit ideas of where we are in terms of individual line items, you can see that our current real estate taxes, and these are current real estate taxes, not delinquents, are very strong. This is in effect of $4.3 million or 4.39% increase year over year. State revenues and earned income taxes materially consistent with prior year. Our interest income is about $1.4 million over prior year. Federal revenue and other local revenue, as well as amusement taxes and our IDA program, are very consistent. I will continue to beat the drum over delinquent taxes and interim taxes, as well as transfer taxes. Again, with the slowdown we see coming out of the last few years, those are line items that are just decreasing, and we have a budget accordingly or appropriately for that in the 24-25 to account for the downward trend in those revenues. From an expenditure standpoint, this just kind of gives a little bit more of a regurgitation, as well as just separates out the wages and benefits from all other line items, and you can see the notes down there listed from A through F. Again, nothing down there that I did not just previously mention. Just wanted to give the board or the committee additional narrative. When we talk about expenses by function, we always want to make sure that our instructional services or our instructional dollars are consistent with prior years. And you can see that instructional dollars are coming in at about $42 million, 52.2% of overall total expenditures. $23 million in support services, represent 29.5%, and then community services, other use of funds, and the transfer out round out the top three. Support services is where you would see the invoices for transportation. So again, that number is a little skewed in terms of comparison, but I expect that to level out and us to get back up around that 53% of instructional services overall. That's just something that we're mindful of and we always want to keep an eye on month over month as well as year over year. Any questions on the current budget as it stands for January? Nope. Okay, great. And the last item on my agenda, again, is just
Mark,
a reminder. Sorry, Rick.
I do have questions. The retention program that we put in place for the bus drivers, is that, now that wasn't in the original budget, is that going to impact a line item when that gets paid out at the end of the year, or?
That is a dollar for dollar with the federal COVID money. So it will not have a detrimental effect to our budget. Like I said, it's money out, but then it's also money being rushed from the federal government.
And then theoretical process discussion, as far as like budget overages go, where it's like, hey, this line item was this, and now we're at 119% of that. I know our job is to approve the budget, and then is there anything we're supposed to be doing, saying like?
No, that's
okay.
administration's responsibility. The committee and the board sets the budget, and then it's my department, my budget, as well as the rest of the administration to make sure we administer it responsibly and adjust as needed within the parameters of our budget.
Keep asking questions throughout the spring. Final approval isn't scheduled until June 10th. We're required to have a preliminary, it's funny, it's called a final proposed budget.
Final proposed.
And that has to sit for 30 days. So we'll do that in April, because the April and May board meetings are 28 days apart. So we'll do that final proposed budget in April and then final budget in June. So we'll have more clarity, hopefully, from the governor's address tomorrow, also from enrollment. Should we need more than 3 positions? Should we need less than 3 positions? It's a living, breathing document, obviously, not only during the year, but then also during the development process. I'll give Mark kudos. I've worked with about 6 or 7 different business managers, and he has spent the past 2 months visiting all of the buildings, walking all the buildings, asking questions, whether it's about facilities, personnel, programs, special education, and really walked with and the principals have been very appreciative of that. So he's seeing where the dollars go. I've worked with plenty of business managers who are truly numbers people and just look at numbers on a sheet, but it's in education, it's different. You have to see, where the dollars go, and they go to obviously a variety of areas. So I really appreciate the work he's done.
And then just to tie into what Dr. Christian said, the last item on my agenda is just a reminder. Governor Shapiro is scheduled to give his Commonwealth budget address tomorrow at 11 o'clock. If anybody wants to tune in, I will provide a summary of what he says this week in board notes on Friday. No. I will absolutely have a coffee in my hand, but no popcorn. And that concludes my agenda for tonight, Mr. Carpenter.
Are there any public comments on tonight's meeting? Any board comments? All right, seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.
Just a reminder to the board, we have a brief exec session in the conference room after this to discuss personnel and negotiations.